here. And if we need to get some more, I'll send Steve down the hall to get some folding chairs. This one behind here. Do you want a chair, Todd?
Oh, I have one right there.
Oh,
Thank you.
I need that one. Come on, Ed. I am so glad you're here because I think we are all in for a very informative hour or so. I met this wonderful, authentic voodoo priest about a month ago, and I was quite impressed with what he shared with me. So I have the honor of introducing you to this authentic voodoo priest. House of the Divine Prince is a voodoo spiritual church. Divine Prince Tai Emeka is an authentic voodoo priest, practitioner, and actor who has appeared on several television commercials and in reality TV shows like Big Frida Bounces Back in 2017, and he's been in many other events on television. He's acknowledged as king and leader of authentic New Orleans voodoo. Divine Prince is also an ordained and licensed minister with the Universal Life Church. So I will let him take over because I know he has much to share with us. Thank you for being here. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you. First, I want to say that out of all the things that I've done on TV, movies, documentaries, I was going to tell the truth back in June. Some of you might have saw that. This is probably the most humbling thing I've ever done. I'm grateful to be in the presence of my community, my peers, my elders, people who are born and raised here. I want to share my story. I don't think I can appropriately talk about voodoo without talking about me and who I am and how I got to this place. As you may have already known, I'm going to first say the pink elephant in the room. I'm a transplant. And I'm happy to say I'm a transplant. And I'm happy to say I'm a successful transplant. I've been here 22 years. I've given my life to the culture, to the tradition, to the education, re-education of what voodoo is. There's nothing about me that's secret. It may be unknown to you right now, but there's nothing about me that's secret. I come from a strict evangelical Christian family. Both of my parents, till this day, are both evangelical ministers. My father resides in Clinton, Mississippi. My mother resides in Canton, Mississippi. My mother has written 4 books already about me and my life and how I got to be here. But she focused on the tragedy, the pain, the story. I grew up in a very violent and abusive household. The best way I can describe my dad is crazy, okay? We have very limited relationship today. Often if I'm pressed to describe my parents in terms of Christianity, my mom is God, my dad is the devil. My dad for me represents the worst demonstration that I would expect for a Christian, whereas my mother has risen above the tragedy and has written 4 books. My sister, Wapani Savage, has also written 3 books. So a great deal of who I am is already known. But I want to introduce it to you, my community. First, I want to start by just singing a short welcome song because it will tie for me in the history of how voodoo got here. We can't talk about voodoo without talking about the history, without talking about enslavement, without talking about religion, but also without talking about culture. And so I want to start by singing a Yoruba welcome song, Funga Alafia. However, there's a refrain in the song, I go, Ame, I go, Ame, which is a con. So this song is a gumbo within itself, a mixture of Yoruba language and tradition. Funga Alafia, Ashe, Ashe. Fungi Alafia, Ashe, Ashe. I go, I go, Fungi Alafia, Ashe, Ashe. And it's a welcome song that is very common in the grassroots community, not just here in the South, but in America as it relates to African culture and tradition. But I start with that song because it ties us to a much more popular song that many of you might know, which is Iko. Iko, Iko. And it has been come to be understood that Iko, Iko might be a mispronunciation of Ago, Ame. So for me, it represents the presence of voodoo culture early on in our community, in our tradition. When we say voodoo, for me, it's an umbrella word because it encompasses the Akan, the Fan, the Ewe, the Igbo, the Hausa, the various ethnic groups that were brought here by way of the Middle Passage. Without acknowledging the Middle Passage, we can't talk about voodoo. Voodoo would not have been here without enslavement, without the Middle Passage. And everywhere voodoo was planted, from Brazil to Louisiana, it sprouted up again in a new form. Now, something that I think many people are less aware of was sort of the arrangement between the Catholic Church south of the border, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Brazil, in allowing us to maintain our traditions under the guise that it would keep us peaceful as long as we converted to Catholicism. So we now see a lot of amalgamation, syncretization of voodoo behind Christian symbolism. The statue of Mother Mary, the statue of St. Peter, and the various saints that now encoded hide our traditions. The reason we had to hide our traditions is probably obvious. South of the border, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, they were allowed to come together in their off time, in their space, and drum and dance and sing and participate in what they remembered. Here, north of the border, the only place that was allowed to happen was here in New Orleans, in Congo Square. Anywhere else, we were at the threat of death to just gather, to sing anything African, to play anything coded. Any use of drums would have been outlawed for us. So that makes Congo Square unique in the preservation of this tradition of voodoo. People often ask, how did it get to New Orleans? And what is it in New Orleans? So I can't talk about voodoo without talking about tourism, commercialism, entertainment, book authors, and much of what we think we know and understand comes from these domains. I myself, as a professional actor and performer, I was on American Horror Story. I was the voodoo priest when Adelia sought Marie Laveau to get pregnant. I've done Terrence Howard Fright Club, where I actually drunk fake human blood. So I'm not averse to entertainment. I understand the difference between creativity, entertainment, imagination, and then what is authentic to the tradition. So if, I like to say, we were able to count in Far, in Akan, in Ewe, in Igbo, we're only now being asked to count in Portuguese, Spanish, English. So if we could remember how to count, if we could remember our rhythms, then we can remember our deities. We can remember our saints. We can remember our rituals. And often those rituals were played out in Congo Square and then to the various aspects of the community. One of the ways that counting shows up in voodoo culture is by way of divination. And this is, first of all, I want to say before I move forward, I'm often going to use Yoruba wording. And the reason for that is the Yoruba are the most educated, degreed ethnic group in America. A lot of people don't realize that. So in terms of books, knowledge, availability to their culture, the Yoruba is the most prolific. I have a ongoing, I'm in my 12th year, ongoing internet radio broadcast. I've migrated it into YouTube. So I do a daily YouTube live now. And I often talk about the things that I'm sharing with you right now. The proliferation of Yoruba information. And I sometimes refer to it rather sarcastically as an Orisha romance, because I, in my opinion, see us, young African Americans, middle-aged African Americans, who are now thirsty for culture, thirsty for some sort of connection to their roots. The proliferation of technology like Ancestry.com and 23andMe has now made it even easier for us to connect to those African roots, but we often do it foolishly, without instruction. We do it in social media, we do it in Instagram, and we don't do it in academia. We don't do it where the real facts and information often lay. So we mask behind Yoruba. So a common word now in our culture is alafia, is ashe. These are purely Yoruba-based words, and they deny the presence of other families, other ethnic groups that also exist in this realm that we call voodoo. Something else that has happened by way of pop culture, racism, negative portrayals of what African culture is sort of the bastardization of voodoo in comparison to systems like Akan or Ifa. Today, when many people have more access to resources, passports, availability to travel, we're often seeing a tourism-based path between here and Osogbo, Nigeria, in order to receive a weekend-based initiation or a week-long experience into these cultures and the traditions. But when we think of places like Togo, Benin, they're extremely poor in comparison to Osogbo. And so we don't get as much knowledge or information. Even as a avid Google Bing search user, you can't even begin to look into these cultures if you can't speak another language, like French, for instance. So I consider myself very Google Translate savvy today so that I can explore other languages that otherwise wouldn't come up right away in your search about voodoo and what voodoo is. So the counting is, first of all, reinforced through our divination system. So this is called, in Yoruba, a table of Ifa in English. I'm not going to use a whole lot of language that people won't understand. On this board is poured a powder. This powder is called Iro Sun powder. It comes from a particular tree in Nigeria. It is said to be produced by termites, and the termites eat this wood and produce this powder. And the powder is considered to be sacred. It's used to coat the board of divination. Now, this board of divination is used in all those ethnic groups that I mentioned, the Akan, the Fan, the Eve, etc. But it's going to be called something different based on their language, the family, the lineage. The board would be tapped in a rhythmic pattern. And while that's going on, a babalawo or a priest would have these palm nuts. They would be much bigger than this, but palm nuts. And they would be beating them in their hand. And every time they do this, the goal is to leave either one or two palm nuts in their hand. And when this happens, an algorithm is created. And some of you may be aware that this is the same binary coded 256-point algorithm that's used to fuel our computers today. It's the same as this divination system. In Yoruba, it's Ifa. In other voodoo-based traditions, it's just Fa. And each time we mark the palm nuts, another system developed later on because of the lack of availability to palm nuts in the New World, where we use cowrie shells. And the cowrie shells would then be shaken and cast on the board, And depending on the number of face-up cowrie shells, we would get a corresponding what's called Odu. And the Odu, or the code, if you will, by the practitioner, would then be marked on the board like this. So there's either going to be a series of Roman numeral ones, if you will, or Roman numeral twos. And they correspond with the 256 Odus that are present in the corpus of our tradition. Many people believe that voodoo has no Bible, has no text, and that's not true either. This 256 Odu system is our text. And within each sign is a corpus of information. You might refer to them as Psalms or Proverbs, and they would speak to the particular condition of the individual who has sought the practitioner. So this system would not have been lost on the enslaved African. Their ability to act this out in a public way would have been compromised, particularly here in the US. But our ability to count would not have been compromised. So the small collection of stones or pebbles or shells or seeds would have easily masked our ability to operate within these systems. Forgive me for not being able to quote and recite a lot of text and information, though I do have access to that. But there was a study, I believe, in the Gullah Geechee Nation, which is the Carolina coast, Maryland, Virginia coast. And they found that in these archaeologically investigated landscapes, they were finding hearths where the fire was and a small pile of white stones. Or in a particular corner of the house, a small pile of white stones. And they found this to be a consistent pattern. So they believed it was representing what I'm trying to stress today, that though we might have had to conceal the practice continued and went on. Another great aspect of what voodoo is ancestral honor and worship, which is another key point that I'm going to talk about, which ties voodoo to what we see as indigenous or native New Orleanian culture. And that is our ancestral masquerade. This is a Gulede mask from Nigeria. This would represent Iyawa, or Iya meaning mothers or great mothers. Iyami, my great mother. And it's a form of ancestral masquerade in West Africa. It is a masquerade that is traditionally performed by men, but the sculptures are carved to represent great mothers, great mother ancestors. And of course, your entire body is covered. I'm also a masking Indian. I probably should have said that early on. Another reason why I count myself to be an extremely successful transplant. I've masked with David Montana and Yellow Pocahontas. I've been on the street with Creole Wild West and Fayaya and many others, and I'm now in my 8th year of masking. But I also think it's important to mention Sharice Harrison and Guardians of the Flame, which is the original gang that I masked with. And she is a maroon masking gang. Maroon representing the enslaved African that managed to escape or free themselves during that time, which is the key ancestral root by which we say that we mask Indian, to acknowledge the native Indians who assisted us in escaping, who assisted us in the transition. So the tie between ancestral masking in voodoo and ancestral masking as Mardi Gras Indians, to me, is really obvious. Even when we look at the suit structures are often very different than what we would see on a ceremonial indigenous American suit. This is called a flag. This is a voodoo flag. I beaded this in the Haitian voodoo style, Haitian bebe beading style. I wore this on my suit 4 years ago. But this type of style of beading is not something that we would commonly see in indigenous American culture. It's something that's much more akin to West African ancestral. In Yoruba, we would say Egungun masquerade. Egun meaning the dead, Egungun meaning the ascended dead or the ascended ancestors. And so this also distinguishes New Orleans culture, New Orleans voodoo, from other forms of voodoo. I'm often asked, doesn't voodoo come from Haiti? No, voodoo arrived here on the very first ship, which arrived from the Bight of Benin, and brought voodoo with them. It's a matter of fact, when I was doing some research last night, the very last ship that brought slaves to Louisiana also arrived from the Bight of Benin. So the presence of voodoo was already here before the Haitian Revolution. It was maybe coaxed a little bit more out in the open. I also believe that it fed more of the fear of voodoo, because there was already a fear of revolution as the Creoles and the escaping Haitians were coming to the mainland for safety and security. So there was already a fear of surrection and uprising and violence and all sorts of things. But I believe that that also helped to create a negative environment for voodoo to then flourish and move forward, though we know that it did. It did up until the present day. Many of the deities of voodoo show up now in pop culture, New Orleans culture to some degree, like Baron Samedi, who's a character that I've been found to play quite often. I did a Beat a Beer commercial as Baron Samedi. I showed up as Baron Samedi on To Tell the Truth. He is now a unique character to New Orleans, separate from Haiti. In Haiti, Baron is a corpse. So literally in the midst of the voodoo ceremony, the priest goes into a trance and falls out dead, and they stuff his ears and his nose and cover him with powder and wrap him up, much like you would in the embalming process. Here in Louisiana, Baron takes on a more jovial, festive Frog and the Princess demonstration. Some of you may have seen that portrayal. I'm guilty of being Dr. Facilier as well. That character was rooted in many of my characteristics and how I show up as a voodoo practitioner. And again, I take great pride and honor and respect as a transplant to not only represent this culture, but to seek to want to represent it in its most appropriate and authentic way. We do have to consider tourism, and tourism has its place. Entertainment has its place, but there's a thin line between entertainment and then that becoming our story, to the delusion of the truth of what our story is. Some of the deities that show up now in our culture and pop culture, along with Baron Samedi, is Eshu, or Papa Legba, the trickster. He was once symbolized as the signifying monkey. Some of you may be familiar with the Aesop fables and the signifying monkey, who has many of Eshu or Papa Legba's symbolism, characteristics, but also many of his truths, his purpose for being, to teach divine truths. We have characterized Eshu as trickster. I like to say he's a divine trickster. And the trick is often built in ego. Ego. When we think we know, and we think we understand, and we think we're God, and we assume an all-knowing stance, it is ego that becomes a trick that has now been encapsulated in this character that we know as Eshu. Eshu is his Yoruba name, is his root name. Legba is a Haitian voodoo fond derivative of the same deity. So a part of his trick is his many characters, his many personalities, and his ability to speak more than one language. When we look at the various ethnic groups that brought voodoo to the New World, Eshu is one of the main characters that shows up universally. Uh, the ancestors is a character or family of characters that shows up universally. But then you have family-based, unique deities that are specific to a particular location in West Africa that have now made their way into the New World in a whole new form that I often refer to as the Orisha romance. Because of entertainment, because of cartoons, because of comic books, even the last generation of entertainment on television that exposes us to witchcraft and Satanism and ghosts and angels and fairies and all these things, people are indeed confused, I think, about what religion is, and then our opening ourselves up to these various other forms and spirits. I don't mean to wax evangelical, but I am. I was raised in that, I was steeped in that. And people often assume that voodoo is somehow without moral, without value, without rules, without principles. And absolutely it's all those things, just as any other religious tradition would be. The desire to want to capture money or quick love, or to overcome your enemies are not voodoo concepts. These are concepts that have made their way into voodoo through pop culture. A great suspect in that is commerce. Once we start selling candles and selling powders and selling gree-grees, now we've removed religion, we've removed the moral compass, and now it's just a product. And in many cases, we are not always even connected to the product. There are retailers, sellers who sell because it's sellable and it's tourism and it's retail, and they have no real connection to voodoo as a religion, as a culture at all. So my desire is now and always is to represent the authentic truth about what voodoo is, to dispel the ongoing myths, the ongoing fantasies, even the ongoing fears that people have about the tradition. My mother and I particularly have forged a unique relationship with her being still devoutly evangelical and then me operating in voodoo. And we often get involved in very deep conversations. One that I would hope to have with you all here today when you ask your questions and make your comments, that allow us to find the unifying factors in our belief systems, in our traditions, as opposed to that which divides us and keeps us separate. Many of the items that I have here are West African in origin, particularly these pieces. The bell is a unique sign to voodoo in West Africa.
That's a bell?
This is a bell.
Okay. I see.
It's actually the bell. This particular bell is called a gankakui that leads the drums in any ritual ceremony. The drums follow the bell. It's the bell's responsibility to hold the beat, to hold the rhythm, because you may have 4 or 5 different drums, different size drums that are all playing different rhythms. And it's the bell that holds it together. It's the bell that's also used in voodoo in West Africa called spirits, to introduce the spirits into the ceremony. So the drummers might be feverishly going, but once the bell joins in, it's when the spirits are introduced into the ceremony. We now see that as a cowbell. Even in second lines, brass bands, you now find that cowbell presence in the music. And I believe it's a descendant of our remembrance of voodoo. And the cowbell is just a tool that we now can use that the former masters would not have necessarily assumed right away was voodoo. This is a nutcracker from the Caribbean, but it has many of the symbols of Mami Wata present on her. Mami Wata is a major mother, nurturing figure in West Africa, and we now see it showing up in the New World in a more unique, usable fashion. This dancing wand represents Shango, and Shango was known as a king. In fact, he was the third king of Oyo, Nigeria, the only living human being who then died, became an ancestor, and then was elevated to the realm of an
Yeah,
Orisha.
turn it around, there's a baby on the back.
Now you ask, why is it being represented by a female holding a gold pot? Now his symbol is the double axe, which rests on her head. But this represents Odu. And Odu are the signs that I suggested earlier that would be drawn out on a board of divination. She's holding the pot of creation. That would be any of the pots that hold the shells, the seeds, the tools used in the divination. And so there are 16 universal signs. And these signs appear as such.
Are those the same ones that you're putting in the yellow stuff?
That the priest would write in the dust, yes ma'am. And that would be determined by how many palm nuts would remain in the hand, or how many shells are turned up on the board. And any two combinations, like two parents, creates a new Odu. So you would have to palm the nuts until you created two symbols, or you would have to throw the shells until you created two symbols. And then those two symbols would represent the new baby, the new child, the new birth, the new Odu. And that will be read like a proverb, like a psalm, to determine many things, not just some of the Western ideas that we have today, again, about love and money and luck. But these systems would have been used to determine your name, your life path, your position in life, even some judicial and governmental concerns within the community in West Africa. These decisions would have been made and determined based on these Odus, based on these systems. So they were very important. They were important enough, I believe, to remember, to not lose or forget. Somehow the ideas that we lost, we forgot. It was somehow beat out of us. And again, I think it's as simple as, if you can count in Ebe, you can count in English. If you can count in Fon, you can count in Portuguese. And so you don't lose that connection to your rhythm, and you don't lose that connection to our calendar. We operate on a 4-day calendar, by the way.